November 29th, 2003, 3:47 a.m. Wan Chai, a district notorious for its relentless pulse of neon, vice, and commerce, never truly sleeps. Yet, ascend beyond the cacophony of the main thoroughfares, climbing the serpentine stone steps of Ship Street, and the urban soundtrack dissolves into something far more disquieting. The atmosphere grows oppressive. Shadows elongate into impossible geometries. And there, concealed behind a curtain of gnarled banyan roots and decades of neglect, looms an architectural anomaly that defies temporal logic. Nam Koo Terrace. Though among locals, it bears a far more visceral designation, the Red House. On this particular evening, 8 adolescents arrived, armed with nothing more than halogen flashlights and the fatal hubris of youth. They sought spectral encounters, phantoms to validate their bravado, tales to immortalize their daring among peers come Monday morning. To them, this expedition represented sport, entertainment. What they failed to comprehend was that Nam Koo Terrace does not host visitors. It collects them. According to the official incident report logged with the Hong Kong police force, the group reached the perimeter through a carotid section of the property's fence. For approximately 20 minutes, the intrusion proceeded without incident. Merely the rhythm of labored breathing and a crystalline crunch of shattered glass fragmenting. Beneath rubber soles, they traversed the desolate courtyard, photographed the vandalized murals adorning crumbling walls. Juvenile laughter echoed through chambers that had known only silence for half a century. Then came the catalyst. They ascended the deteriorating wooden staircase toward the first floor landing. At precisely 4:12 a.m., residents occupying adjacent apartment complexes were jolted from sleep, not by the mechanical drone of traffic, but by something primitively human, screaming. Raw, unfiltered terror, vocalized at a frequency that pierced concrete and conscience alike. The sound proved so harrowing that multiple witnesses seized their telephones, simultaneously dialing 999 in a collective panic. 3 girls from the exploration party erupted from the mansion's entrance in absolute hysteria. Tears streaked their faces, their bodies convulsed with fear. Yet one subject, let us designate her subject C, did not flee. She remained immobilized upon the staircase's midpoint, her gaze fixed upon the corridor's abyssal darkness. Her companions attempted physical extraction, grasping at her arms, her shoulders. She would not yield. It was as though her feet had fused with the floorboards themselves. Rooted by some invisible force, what transpired next would be documented across every major publication in the territory by sunset. Subject's facial musculature contorted into a rictus of inexplicable fury. Her eyes underwent a retrograde rotation, exposing only the whites. When her mouth opened, the voice that emerged violated every biological principle governing a 16-year-old female larynx. It resonated with depth, with authority, with the unmistakable timbre of an adult male. The phrase she articulated would become the headline that traumatized the city.
Follow me back upstairs.
When law enforcement personnel arrived, their expectations aligned with routine juvenile trespassing, perhaps intoxication, conceivably narcotics. What confronted them defied procedural training entirely. Subject C had devolved into a state of primal violence. Official reports confirm that 4 sworn officers, grown men conditioned in physical restraint techniques, struggled to subdue a single adolescent girl weighing approximately 45 kilograms. Contemplate that mathematics for a moment. 4 professionally trained adults, outmatched by a teenager whose physical strength had somehow transcended aeronautical limitations. Emergency medical technicians eventually secured her to a spinal board as the ambulance's crimson beacons painted the red house's facade in rhythmic pulses of light. Subject C continued vocalizing in that aberrant baritone register at Queen Mary Hospital's emergency department. Physicians administered a comprehensive toxicological screening, tests calibrated to detect cocaine, MDMA, ethanol, methamphetamine, and the spectrum of consciousness-altering substances. Every panel returned negative. Her bloodstream contained nothing. No chemical explanation. No pharmaceutical catalyst. Her biology was pristine. This event remains among the scant collective possession incidents in Hong Kong's modern history, substantiated by law enforcement, documentation, medical records, and journalistic investigation. It compelled an entire metropolis to confront a question suppressed for 60 years. What consciousness still inhabits the Red House? To comprehend the horror manifested in 2003, one must first acknowledge the opulence of 1918 before metamorphosing into a repository of dread. Nam Koo Terrace symbolized unparalleled prosperity. The structure was commissioned by the Tu family, prominent merchants whose commercial influence extended across colonial Hong Kong during that epoch. Wan Chai represented development's bleeding edge, and securing hillside real estate constituted the ultimate declaration of status. The architectural vision was extraordinary in its cultural synthesis. Red bricks, imported via maritime trade routes from London's kilns, formed the exterior shell. Ornamental wrought iron balustrades framed each level. Yet the spatial configuration adhered to traditional Chinese geometric principles, featuring a central courtyard meticulously designed to accumulate qi, the metaphysical life force. This was to be a domicile radiating fortune and longevity. In 1921, the property transferred to Jackman, a senior executive within the renowned Win-On department store empire. For 2 decades, these walls reverberated with the sounds of silk-draped social gatherings, high-stakes commercial negotiations, and multi-generational family banquets. It stood as paradise incarnate, commanding panoramic views of Victoria Harbour's glittering expanse. But history possesses a malevolent tendency to invert paradise into perdition. December 1941. The Battle of Hong Kong. Imperial Japanese forces surged across the border. British colonial defenses disintegrated within days. On Christmas Day, the garrison capitulated. Thus commenced what survivors would forever designate as D3, years and 8 months, an interval of occupation, brutality, and systematic erasure of human dignity. Wan Chai transformed overnight. The district became militarized territory, repurposed to serve the occupying administration. The Red House, with its tactical elevation above the harbor and its luxurious appointments, was immediately requisitioned by military authorities. The two families faced expulsion, or perhaps something far worse. In 1943, the patriarch Tu Chakman perished within the mansion's confines. The official mortality documentation lists cause of death as unknown, a bureaucratic euphemism that conceals volumes. Local historians, however, have reconstructed a narrative substantially more sinister. Throughout the occupation, Wan Chai evolved into the operational hub for an extensive network of so-called comfort stations, a clinical military designation, masking the reality of institutionalized sexual enslavement. Thousands of women and girls were abducted from their homes across occupied territories. A significant proportion were transported to the grand, Western-style mansions dotting Wan Chai's hillsides, conscripted to service high-ranking officers. While no singular archival document explicitly states, Nam Koo Terrace functioned as a comfort station. The neighborhood's oral historiography demonstrates remarkable consistency. Elderly residents of Wan Chai recount witnessing women being forcibly escorted up the steep grades of Ship Street. They speak of nocturnal screaming emanating from the Red House, anguished cries that neighbors dared not acknowledge. For intervention equated to execution. Envision the psychic residue accumulated within those chambers, day upon day. Violence perpetrated systematically. Humiliation ritualized. Death rendered banal. Chinese metaphysical philosophy holds that when an individual expires, while experiencing profound injustice, consumed by what practitioners term yuan qi, or grievance energy, their consciousness cannot transition to the ancestral realm. Instead, it becomes imprisoned within the physical location of their suffering. And Red functions as a conductor of exceptional potency in the spiritual spectrum. The Red House earned its colloquial designation not merely from its masonry, but from what the esoteric tradition recognizes as woos, saturated in the blood of those who never escaped. When armistice arrived in 1945, Japanese forces withdrew, but the structure itself had been fundamentally altered on a level imperceptible to conventional perception. The two families eventually reclaimed legal ownership, yet habitation proved psychologically untenable. How does one sleep within bedrooms where such atrocities unfolded? By the 1970s, the property stood completely vacant. Manicured gardens reverted to impenetrable vegetation. Windows succumbed to vandalism. The red house devolved into a desiccated husk, decomposing upon its hillside perch, waiting. Let us return, then, to that November evening in 2003. What mechanism precipitated such a catastrophic event when those students breached the threshold? Skeptical analysts and clinical psychologists invoke a diagnosis: mass psychogenic illness. Their framework argues the subjects arrived in a heightened state of suggestibility. Environmental factors, darkness, decay, cultural mythology surrounding the location prime their limbic systems for panic response. One individual succumbed to acute anxiety, triggering a cascade of sympathetic reactions among the group. Subject C's transformation, they contend, represents a dissociative episode wherein her consciousness fragmented, permitting unconscious theatrical performance of a possessed archetype. The superhuman strength, merely an adrenaline-mediated phenomena. The masculine vocal register, physiological distortion produced by extreme vocalization. It constitutes a rational hypothesis, tidy, palatable, scientifically defensible. Yet this framework catastrophically fails to account for the incident's granular specifics. Why did Subject C articulate the precise phrase, "Follow me back upstairs"? Upstairs toward the residential quarters, toward the chambers where officers would have escorted captive women. Why did witnesses describe the voice as possessing Japanese intonation patterns? Why did 4 police officers, personnel trained in combat engagement protocols, prove incapable of restraining a single adolescent female? Adrenaline operates within physiological parameters. Physics imposes absolute boundaries. Paranormal researchers propose an alternative theoretical model, the stone tape theory. Contemporary science confirms that quartz and silica-based minerals, constituents prevalent in natural stone and fired brick, demonstrate electromagnetic storage properties. This principle underpins modern silicon-based data retention technology. The stone tape theory extrapolates that emotionally charged events, particularly involving extreme trauma or mortality, generate substantial energetic output. This energy, proponents argue, imprints itself upon proximate building materials in a manner analogous to magnetic tape recording. The red bricks comprising Nam Koo Terrace's structure function. In this model, as archival media, they recorded the events spanning 1941 through 1945 with meticulous fidelity. For 60 years, that recording remained dormant. Then, On November 29th, 2003, a cohort of energetic adolescents, individuals emanating bioelectric fields intensified by fear, entered the space. Perhaps their collective presence supplied the requisite energy threshold to initiate playback. Subject C was not merely possessed in the supernatural vernacular. She was being overwritten. Her consciousness temporarily displaced by a far more dominant, far more rage-saturated data file embedded within the walls. The male voice did not originate from a demonic entity. It was memory made audible. The recorded echo of a perpetrator still issuing commands, still asserting dominion over this house, despite his corporeal absence for decades, and the accompanying witnesses. They reported observing shadowy silhouettes, a decapitated female figure upon the staircase. These perceptions align disturbingly with unverified accounts of executions allegedly conducted. In the rear courtyard, the detail remains corrupted, fragmented by time's erosion, but the fundamental recording persists. This transcends ghost story. This constitutes a historical testimony that categorically refuses erasure. Today, should you traverse Ship Street's incline, the tableau has undergone dramatic revision. In recent years, property conglomerate Hopewell Holdings assumed control of the site. They have executed comprehensive restoration of Nam Koo Terrace. Shattered fenestration has been replaced with period-appropriate glazing. Graffiti has been chemically eradicated. The suffocating vegetation has been systematically cleared. Development proposals include transforming the structure into a marriage registry facility, a venue dedicated to wedding ceremonies and romantic celebration. It represents a noble aspiration to transmute a locus of suffering into a sanctuary of affection, to cleanse blood stains with champagne toasts and exchanged vows. Yet, there exists an axiomatic principle within architectural preservation. You can modify function, but you cannot eradicate memory. Despite fresh coatings of paint, despite contracted security personnel and LED illumination arrays, the Red House continues to occupy its hillside position with palpable awkwardness. It appears fundamentally incongruous amid Wan Chai's gleaming contemporary skyline. The structure radiates a quality best described as gravitational density. The students from that 2003 incident have progressed into adulthood. Not one has consented to public testimony regarding the evening's events in the intervening years. They seek amnesia, erasure. The police file has been administratively closed. Medical documentation archived in bureaucratic obscurity. Yet, every pedestrian who passes Ship Street space during nocturnal hours instinctively accelerates their pace. They avert their gaze from the red brick balconies, because beneath conscious rationalization, we all recognize the fundamental truth. We possess the capacity to renovate structures. We can redact historical narratives. We can perform collective denial regarding atrocities committed. But the bricks remember. And occasionally, if one's auditory acuity proves sufficiently acute, you can still perceive the recording in its perpetual playback loop. Therefore, should your travels bring you to Hong Kong, and you encounter a striking crimson mansion commanding a hillside vista, admire its facade from a respectful distance. Photograph its exterior if you must, but do not cross its threshold, because certain portals, once unsealed, defy all subsequent attempts at closure.